Well, why don't we just go ahead and kick this monthly webcast off? I'm Lisa Brush with the Stewardship Network. Really pleased to be here with you all today for the Stewardship Network's monthly webcast. As I'll tell you, I'll give you a little bit more intro, but really pleased to be here with Bob and Dave, who have been on the ride with the Stewardship Network since the very beginning. So thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are not familiar with the Stewardship Network, we are a 501c3 nonprofit that is 20 plus years old with an international and national award-winning organization. We now serve 20 different place-based member communities, coast to coast across the US, starting right here in Southeast Michigan. And for those of you who are new to the webcast, they happen each second Wednesday of the month, as they have for the last 15 years. Dave was part of the very first one that we did.
That's true.
With Doug. And back when this was not the way that we did business, back when it was a really cool cutting edge thing. So really pleased to be able to share with you the organization. Our mission is to connect, equip, and mobilize people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. And we are right now in the midst of the Spring Challenge, which is also 15 years old. And so we started the Spring Challenge as a way to elevate the stewardship work that people are doing. And 2022 is the most inclusive Spring Challenge that we've had. And so there are 3 different areas of this. So again, you can participate in the Spring Challenge no matter what your connection with nature or stewardship is. You can be part of Compete, and you can, as a member community, a partner organization, or as an individual, planting plants in your neighbor's backyard to help them out. The support areas for people who want to find a volunteer event and go participate in that, or make a donation, help power the machine that runs this Spring Challenge. And then new for this year is for the creatives. So those people who are connected to nature, but not with their hands in it, but who are painting nature, or who are doing music around nature, or all of those things. We've gotten some great submissions, music, art, other kinds of things. I keep threatening, I have a really cool oak leaf inspired quilt that I made. So I'm gonna submit that. It's super cool. So again, the Compete portion of this is where you report your hours. And it's, again, you all may remember that we've had our Cluster Cup. The Cluster Cup is back in new form for member communities, partner organizations, and individuals. Compete doesn't seem just right to you. Think of yourself as part of the big team. Just report your hours. That's what we want, is we want all of us working together. And again, as I said, it's the most inclusive Spring Challenge yet. So you can, report what invasive species that you've removed or pulled, prescribed fire, herbicide work, monitoring, river monitoring, photo monitoring, planting. As I say, whether you planted a prairie or a tomato plant, report your planting. We want to see all the connections out there. And then cleanups. We've had beach cleanups and urban lot cleanups coming. So report in that. You can go to our stewardshipnetwork.org/report. And you will see the Spring Challenge. So you can go to our website and find the Spring Challenge. As you can see, it's super easy. You put your name in, what your home post zip code is, and then what activity you took place in. Anything since April 13th is fair game, and it goes until July. So peak field season has arrived. We now have 15,000 plus hours reported by member communities, partner orgs, and individuals are all on the books. And again, anything that you've done up since April 13th, April 8th, April 13th, you can report. So we want to hear it. We want to hear it. Just 4 weeks left until the challenge ends. Again, the second area is support. So get out and volunteer with a great group in your area, or donate, help power the program financially, even if you can't be there. And again, the celebrate is share your photos, poems, songs, and other things, and tag us on social media, #TSNSpring. Again, you can go to stewardshipnetwork.org Spring Challenge, where you can see the details about it and learn more about it. And again, now on to the real part of the webcast. Again, as I said, I'm Lisa Brush with the Stewardship Network, and really pleased to be here on Passing the Drip Torch with Dave Borneman and Bob Grese. So Dave retired just this past spring after 28 years with the City of Ann Arbor's Natural Area Preservation Program, which he started and led and built into. You can talk a little bit more about what it is today, but started out with just Dave. And Bob retired after 34 years at the University of Michigan as the director of Matthaei Botanical Gardens in Nichols Arboretum, where he was also a professor of landscape architecture and was the person who taught ecological restoration at the school in the first time. So again, really pleased to be here with dear old friends and colleagues, and looking forward to a trip down memory lane and thinking about the future. And I don't know if you two want to just start out with a little bit of kind of what it was like. I think that stewardship has changed over the past 3 decades, right?
Yeah.
And do you want to start out just sharing a little bit of insight of what kinds of things were going on 28 years ago, 30 years ago when you started?
Well, Bob started.
Bob started, exactly. We used to look to
Sure,
Bob.
sure.
Yeah, right.
So I was a professor at the school for, at the time it was School of Natural Resources and Environment, and became involved at Nichols Arboretum at the university, where of course, historically they had planted buckthorn and honeysuckle by the hundreds back in the early part of the 20th century, and they had taken over large areas of the property there. And so began both working on trying to remove those invasives as well as then trying to steward the prairie there. I was a bit of a pyromaniac, and so reintroduced fire. And so working with the city's fire marshal and the university to bring fire back to the community was a big part of it. And then I don't know, gradually we just started holding work days with people and began to see how much we could accomplish. And that really continued to grow. And we were very pleased when the city created a natural areas program and brought Dave Borneman in.
Yeah, I think the work that you did at the university probably helped to set the stage for that, because I had not been in Ann Arbor before, but the city Parks Department had a land acquisition millage that ran from 1988 to 93 to raise funds for new parkland. And so when that millage expired, rather than getting rid of the millage, the idea was, let's convert that from an acquisition millage to a maintenance and repair millage. And in that millage was funding for this new position, Natural Area Preservation Coordinator. So I was hired, having never been to Ann Arbor before, and showed up. I think people had recognition that we've been buying this land, but we needed to, just setting it aside wasn't enough. We needed to manage it. So I came in new to the city and set about trying to get some idea of what was in the 2,000 plus acres of parkland, and probably 150 or so parks at the time, and just trying to sort that all out and figure out what was out there. We started doing some inventory programs, and then recognized we needed to be doing some restoration work. Bob had already introduced fire, so that wasn't such a crazy idea. Bob and I share a past, both at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. And so fire was a bit more accepted over there. And after Bob introduced it here, then we could start doing some burning in the parks as well, and holding our own work days, and haven't looked back since.
Yeah.
Right.
And then somewhere along the way, we had an opportunity with some grant money that was part of environmental cleanup, some pollution that had happened years ago in the area. And Dave and myself and Paul Rentschler, who ran the Huron River Watershed Council, sat down and said, well, how can we collaborate? You know, there's more power in working together collaboratively. And so we were able to, we came up with the initial ideas of what became the Stewardship Network. And Lisa was coming back to grad school and helped us really figure out what this network could be.
And I was doing drinking water protection and land use planning and mass media education with the Huron River Watershed Council. And I was in my 20s, and I thought it was crazy that we weren't collaborating. So I was saying all of those, we were all kind of coming to this at the same time. And I was just like, why are we not working together? Why are we not? We're all doing septic system, awareness and those kinds of things. And we should really all be doing this together. And when we brought that initial group together, and I think the power of the model that we've had is that the question that we always asked is, what do you all need in order to increase your capacity? Right. And so it was never and then we can talk more as we built it, but it was never we're going to tell you what you need.
Yeah.
It was that, we're going to listen to what you need.
So my position when I started was, I was unique in the city and in the Parks Department. My colleagues in parks did mowing and ran other park recreation facilities and things like that. But in terms of who else to talk to about restoration issues, there's no one really in the city that I could talk to. I would go to national conferences and talk to people who were doing similar work in other places. I used to go over to Chicago to visit to their Stewardship Field Days consortium over there, a workshop over there. And I would drive over there and think, boy, it's great that they've got this whole network of people in the Chicago wilderness area doing this. But how come I have to drive to Chicago to do that? We need to have something like that around here. So Bob and I and Paul and some others started organizing these Stewardship Field Days with the DNR and the Nature Conservancy and some of the local land conservancies, the university and us, just to visit each other's sites to see what people were doing on their various properties, what sort of issues they ran into, we're all facing the same issues of invasive species and fire suppression and user issues with trails and all that sort of stuff. So for a couple of years, we did that, visiting each other's sites and taking turns hosting it.
An opportunity to ask questions and have questions answered and really just
Right.
share among colleagues. And
Right. And sometimes it was just giving people legitimacy that they were local neighbors to a school district property where they didn't feel empowered to really care for the natural areas. And by meeting with our group, they felt that they
Good.
really had more knowledge or more resources to work. So however we could empower people was really a key thing.
right. And it's really fun. So that those continue to this day. Right. I mean, so that's that whole, so Brooks has been part of this. We've been part of kind of revamping the discussion group that was the steward circles that we all did for years together.
Right.
And we're kind of revamping it at post pandemic because 7:30 in the morning online does not work.
Right.
And so we're revamping that now. If you happen to be in Southeast Michigan, it's now on the second Tuesdays of the month, as it always has been for the past 25 years, at 5:30 at night at Vets, Vets Pool and Ice Rink in Ann Arbor.
So, and I remember people used to come in from, we would get together and have these discussions on 7:30 in the morning or 7 in the morning or something. And people would come in from a couple hours away to be part of this discussion because it was just like we used to go to Chicago. This was for people that were in other parts of Southern Michigan, that we were the closest thing they had. So they would come in and start to attend these, and we'd say, we should do this in your own place. You don't need to come to this far. For us,
Right.
in my mind, at least, that was the start of the thinking of the clusters, the whole cluster concept.
Exactly. And so we really did start here in Southeast Michigan in greater Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And then what happened was we held this brainstorming session that had been going for 3 years, and I had been working on it. And I was like, if I'm going to keep doing this for, little did I know, 25 years, it has to be really cool. So again, we brought in more voices, lake to lake across Southern Lower Michigan, who were kind of doing this work. And we said, let's dream a dream of really having a network that's moving a needle. And the biggest thing that came out of that, I remember, was Sherry from the Nature Conservancy and Ray from the State Parks Stewardship Program said it needs to be bigger. And as I was just reminiscing with them, and Bob said, what, are we going to become a statewide organization and hold a conference like that? What, because this is really meaningful on the ground. And so how are we going to do it? And then we piloted the concept in 2 very different locations, one in suburban Oakland County and the other in rural property rights advocate conservative Jackson-Lenawee, Western Washtenaw County. And it worked. You could bring people together, and people are so empowered by listening to each other. Like you said, just neighbors feeling empowered that they could do something. You're connected. You start to connect people sitting around the table with private property owners and Forest Service people and other agency and land trust people. And you always leave a space at the table for people.
Yeah. And it really turned the idea of expertise on its head, that
Exactly.
it wasn't just a few experts, but there were a lot of local people that cared about their land or cared about, and we're watching things change in ways that weren't positive. And so having them come to the table and be able to talk about it with a variety of folks was really powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. We always had in the Parks Department, we had a lot of volunteer park stewards who had adopted their parks. And for some of them, their only connection with this world of restoration was through us. And I always felt like one of the real benefits of the network was that those stewards could connect with the larger world of restoration without having to come through the Natural Area Preservation Program. I think it gave them a sense that what they were doing in their little park was part of a much bigger nationwide, worldwide effort.
Right. And it really, and that's what the Spring Challenge is all about too. It's also, I think it's also really interesting to be able to have them. Also, one of the things that I remember you saying is that it validates kind of the work that you are doing. So they're not just hearing it from you.
Right.
Like this is not just Bob and Dave saying this is a neat thing, but there are more places around there. And I think that the other neat thing I think about the network is you can have that really local piece. You can just be here focused. And then you can start to realize, oh, I'm connected to, I was telling you the story about the Great Lakes Islands connecting to the Santa Cruz Mountains through the Stewardship Network, and kind of really bringing that. And so that concept has always stayed true to who we are. And as we say, there are no such thing as experts. There are only people with varying degrees of experience.
Sure.
And you two have a lot of it. Yeah.
Thank you. As you.
Exactly. We've all come up through it, coming on early. I think one of the other things, it was fun. The 3 of us got together early and have a chance, we haven't seen each other through the pandemic and since retirement that much. But one of the things that I also think is, so Ann Arbor was kind of on the cutting edge because they did realize the stewardship was important. And we were talking a little bit earlier about how, back at that time, and still, it's still emerging, but the idea of stewardship. And so it was really just protection. Let's set these lands aside. Let's plant these trees. Let's do this stuff. But
yeah, there were a lot of people complaining that we really shouldn't be setting aside money for stewardship, that it was just to protect the lands was enough. And then certainly there was the notion too that you could just let volunteers loose on properties and you didn't really have to have a staff. And I think we've really learned over time that volunteers need guidance too. And the Stewardship Network really helps in training and providing those connections for people, but there does need to be some commitment to the ongoing stewardship. You can't just set a land aside and expect it to stay static.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's come even further than that within the city government. Before our program was around, I'd heard reports from people with the Michigan Botanical Club that they had approached the city at one point about adopting one of the parks to do some restoration work in there. And there was some concern from the city government about who this special interest group was and why, we can't really turn this park over to them. There was still a sense we really the city needed to control kind of what went on there. So I think we've come quite a ways in terms of resisting that kind of involvement and now welcoming and encouraging people to come and adopt the parks and be active stewards there.
And I think there's certainly been much more recognition too of welcoming the diversity of voices, the diversity of people, and really recognizing that people have a variety of viewpoints. There's rarely ever some one right approach, and we need to listen to a lot of different voices as we're protecting and caring for land.
yeah, and Bob, can you speak a little bit more to that too? Because I remember back when you've been part of projects that you were also thinking about bringing the school kids in. Right. So not just the adult, but there are a variety of users. And so maybe speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, I remember some years ago, there was a planning effort here in the city of Ann Arbor they were doing a master plan for the whole west side of the town. And the planners had orchestrated a series of meetings, but they didn't involve children. They didn't really hold the meetings in places that welcomed a variety of people. And so one of my colleagues and I decided we challenged it. And so we were suddenly put on a committee. And so we ended up then holding workshops at various schools in the community. And it was interesting talking to children about natural areas in their neighborhoods and what they valued and, how they could be part of the process. And my colleague even went and sat in laundromats to get viewpoints from people there as part of the overall planning process. So it really changed our perspective, at least in terms of, if for kids, they had their local territories, and if they couldn't make it to a place on their bicycle, it was really out of limits for them.
Yeah.
It was, and it was great from a city perspective to be in a university town and have the university available to provide researchers and expertise there. We had many staff who were also students working on their PhDs and things. And my sense from some of them was that, I won't name names, but he was being pressured to, should he do applied research or more pure research? Because he wanted to do research in his botanical field, looking at restoration efforts and things. So I don't know if that's changed within the academia, that there's more interest in doing or more willingness to do research in applied restoration techniques.
I think there's, it's certainly varied across the university, but there are a lot of folks very interested in applied research. And one of the things that I got involved with early on, became very interested in the benefits for volunteers in terms of being involved in stewardship programs. And with one of my colleagues who's more of a behavioral psychologist, we started interviewing and doing surveys and finding out what people's experiences were. And it really led to us thinking very differently about volunteers that came primarily because they wanted to learn new things, that they wanted to feel that their work was valued. And I think reshaped a lot of volunteer work days for both us and certainly maybe some other organizations as well.
Yeah, that I know that helped and guide some of the work we did. One of the outcomes for me from that research that you mentioned was the realization that, part of the restoration, people see brush piles and cut stumps, and those aren't necessarily what people want to see, but if they can understand that this is just one of the steps towards the end goal, they really like that end goal. So I think it gave us the confidence to push ahead and do this, and know that even if things were kind of ugly right now, it was going to lead to a better future that was better ecologically, but would also be more pleasing to the park users as well.
And I think what both of you have done through your programs is provided that opportunity for volunteers to see themselves as part of a process, and included them in that way, in a way that wasn't really part of that before. Otherwise, it was just decisions that were being made on high.
Right.
And there's still some of that. I think there's still some of that struggle, and kind of how do you keep that information flow going?
I don't know where I learned this early on. I wish I knew the source of it, but early on I was pointed out that we would never use the term use volunteers. We work with volunteers.
Right.
And that subtle change in language was I think new to the city. I still hear people do that, and it makes me cringe, talk about, well, we're going to use volunteers. And oftentimes, instead of fully supporting and funding a program with staff, we'll just use volunteers and they can do the work for free. And of course, it doesn't work like that at all. But
right. Another thing that I remember from the early days was the organizations being very territorial about their volunteers and not wanting to share ideas and information. So that was another hurdle that we kind of had to kind of get over and prove that actually, when you do actually share this and there are more volunteer opportunities, there are more volunteers.
Right. One of the things that we found out in the survey work that we did was that most of our volunteers volunteered at multiple organizations. And we even found that people were attracted to towns like Ann Arbor that had volunteer opportunities. So the more you provided opportunities to people, and particularly amongst certain age groups like retirees, that Dave and I are now, that the more likely you're going to be a community where people want to retire.
Yeah.
Bob, I think you were the one that I first heard use the term ecological gardening. That
right.
It's not just go out pulling weeds. It's really very satisfying to the volunteers as well. It's very fulfilling for them to be involved in this gardening work.
Yeah, certainly many people. Partly the motivation for volunteering was to figure out what they could do on their own property. And clearly there's an advantage of not just seeing each individual preserve as a separate entity, but thinking about how to engage the neighbors and have a network of people that are caring for their property ecologically. Yeah.
So when you think about, I'm thinking of some of the different kind of, if you will, success stories. So we're talking about, knowing that it's a path on a journey. What are some stories that you can share?
Well, the success stories are more fun to tell than the
learnings.
Right.
Exactly.
I remember early on. So I started in the fall of '93, and we started doing restoration work probably a year later. We did some inventory work, and well, some of the early ones were not successes. Our first work day was to close down a trail in one of our big parks, Bird Hills Park. There's a spot where 5 trails come together, and it was confusing. There'd been a trail framework study done a few years prior that recommended certain trails be closed to simplify things. So on Super Bowl Sunday, January of 1994, we had a big work day, closed down this trail, patted ourselves on the back. That trail was open the next day, and it remains open to this day. So that was a failure. But we started, I think
probably not listening to people. There was no study that, exactly.
I think some of the early success for us came from our prescribed burn program in the city parks. And I had done some burns back in Wisconsin, as had Bob, and I knew about burning prairies, and knew it was the right thing to do. But I think seeing on the ground the success, I often tell the story of working in one of our parks in Southeast Ann Arbor, now called Mary Beth Doyle Park. And we did our first burn there in March of 2000, early March. So I'd already been burning a few years, but our program was growing, and we did a burn there. And a few weeks later, one of our botanists on staff called me up and said, "Oh my gosh, you can't believe how good this looks out here." There'd been trout lilies there before, but there's just a solid carpet of trout lily. And week after week, there'd be new waves of wildflowers. And so it helped to have a botanist on staff who could really document what was there, and to really be able to see and photograph the changes brought about by the burn programs was just really inspiring to us. So
yeah, I think people seeing those results has been really valuable. And I mean, certainly as we've moved along now with social media, seeing people post pictures of their workday of sort of plants that are in bloom or wildlife that are coming back to sites. All of those things show that kind of appreciation and meaning that it provides in people's lives that I think is very powerful.
Yeah, it's, I think back to some of the early days of, again, where we're talking about protection and conservation, not stewardship. And so some of the organizations here were not participating in stewardship and took a little while of being able to watch on and see actually what that meant before you could,
And I think as the Stewardship Network evolved, particularly as it started to have conferences, people telling their stories was really incredible in terms of seeing the pride that people took and what they were doing in helping care for natural areas in their backyards or in the regional parks or preserves. And the fact that the network has been a place that really provides for people to share information, share expertise, and really share success stories is critical.
Yeah. Share success stories as well as learnings.
Right.
One of the things that we did at the conference 2 years ago was we started the Story Slam, and I loved the first year it was Oops, and it was so good because it was one of those things where like all of us are kind of in this field, and so we could kind of like I could imagine the 5 ways this is about to go wrong that I'm listening to you and just sharing those stories. And so sharing both those successes and those failures, those learnings, I think has been really important and does. Yeah, my mind immediately flashes to like 10 learnings that different people have shared along the way.
Yeah, and it's great to have a community that you can go and do that with, who will understand and not judge, and probably has been there themselves or made similar mistakes. So that's one of the real benefits of having the network. Yeah.
And then I also think the whole idea of the other benefits of the network that I think about are the times when, maybe a planning committee meeting ends, where you're talking about what events are we going to hold this year, what are the topics going to be for the steward circle, or those kinds of things. And then somebody at the end of the meeting says, I just got a grant for $45,000 to do stewardship. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Right.
Somebody else says, oh yeah, $45,000 this year. I have $5,000 this year. What am I going to do? And then because you can start to see both what people have and what the needs are, you can start to come up with creative ideas of that led to a combined field group.
Yeah. I mean, funding has always been an issue, and I think the networking between the different groups has really helped us all sort of know what's out there and what's available. And certainly in recent years, the Stewardship Network has really enabled a lot of groups to take advantage of funding that they wouldn't have otherwise had.
Yeah, so it's been interesting. We've been able to bundle some projects to make them more appealing to funders. So from some of our different member communities, we have our geographically place-based member communities. And so that's been good. We also are embarking on our grand new adventure of becoming the Stewardship Network Fund also in addition, because I, over the years, have been sitting in funders' offices where they've said, we don't want to, you're exactly the kind of organization that we want to fund, but our board hasn't created the bucket for you yet. We don't have our priorities set in that way. Or they say, we don't fund environmental projects because we can't tell the good ones from the bad ones. I say, we do, we know you, we know all of you online, so we're starting on that new effort too, which is, I think, really exciting, and flipping the switch on funding from justification and scarcity mindset to abundance.
Yeah, that's a big change over the last 25 years. Bob and I have both been on the board of the network at different times.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of lean years in the early year there.
There were a lot of lean years, exactly. I used to always say that we needed somebody that cared about money here, because I care about doing these things and getting these things done. And then one year, somebody who was new to the network and just like, wow, what? This is so cool. Like, this is so neat. And he said to me, no, you just didn't let a lack of money get in the way of a good idea. I was like, thank you. That's very kind.
Yeah. One of the other avenues that I think our volunteers and our overall programs has really led to is a greater valuing of natural areas in the broader context. So, I mean, just thinking locally here in the Ann Arbor area, that not only the City of Ann Arbor, but now the county has a natural areas program that didn't exist 25 years ago. Many of the townships have own programs. We have voters have voted in funding programs to purchase and steward land. And I imagine that's happened in other parts of the country as well, that things have grown.
Yeah, early on, before the network was around, I would go to national conferences of the Natural Areas Association or the Society for Ecological Restoration, both of which are great organizations on a national scale. But that's where I had to go to find my people. And I would go and talk to them about this new position I had. And we were doing invasive control and workdays, prescribed burning. And they'd say, "You're doing this in a city park?" There weren't many cities around that were doing this back then. But as Bob says, since then, just throughout Michigan, the spots that I know is lots of other cities and townships and counties that are doing this work. So there is, I think, nationally a growing awareness of the need to not just set aside parkland, fence it off, but to really manage it.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about. Again, it's kind of thinking about some of the ripple effects of the network. One of the things that we were doing is we do periodic trainings on, this was a 3-part series on invasive species control. And the first, so I often, Stewardship Network folks, you've heard me talk about starting things and how it takes time to start things. And in the beginning of the Steward Circle, there would be 4 of us, sitting around.
Right.
And now we're back to rebuilding that. But, there were the years where there were always 15 people, and that was just, you didn't want much more than that.
Right.
But we had this 3-part invasive species series workshop, and 3 people signed up. And I know many partners, when they were presenting, that would say, "I'm not presenting unless 25 people come." But I know that it takes time to build something.
Yeah.
And so the short version of the story is we did it the first time we had 3 people, then we had 6, and then we had 12. But the most important part of this is that 2 of those people in the first workshop were from one park department, from one municipal park department. And they had been talking about doing stewardship for a long time, maybe like you talking to them about doing stewardship, but they were used to mowing, and that's what they like to do. And I got a call from their director like 3 weeks after the series ended. And he's like, "What did you do to my guys?" He's like, "You completely transformed them into
Wow.
understanding the value of this work and what they're doing." And 10 years after that, they now have a natural area program.
Yeah.
And so just, those kind of ripple effects that you see with some of
Right.
those kinds of things.
Seems
Yeah,
like time.
it's been really gratifying seeing. I know both the interns that have worked with the City Natural Areas program, as well as interns that we've had at the Botanic Gardens and Arboretum, and students that I've worked with at the university, they're all finding jobs around the country. So the growth in programs and the opportunities are just tremendous.
Yeah, and as Rita says, perfect time for Rita's comment, I credit NAP with my involvement with parks, native plants, and a better understanding of interrelationships of plants and wildlife.
Yay.
Yeah.
Way to go, Rita.
Way to go, NAP. Yeah. So as you two think about, kind of the piece of, we're talking about passing on the drip torch, right? As you two kind of move into, as Bob, you say, maybe volunteering in your retired life now, and think about some of the other kind of trends that you've seen from the early days to now. I think that in the beginning, I think the question of would the city continue to renew the millage year after year, and would NAP continue to exist, or what's happening with the university and some of the way that they're thinking about properties, and thoughts or insights that you have there.
Well, it's true. And I was hired for this funding was on a 6-year millage. And so when I was hired, I was pulled aside and told, just so you understand, but there's only funding guaranteed for 6 years. So before you move here and relocate your family, we can only guarantee funding for 6 years.
Mhm.
Well, fortunately, the Ann Arbor voters have continued to support that program, that millage, very well. So I think there's no concern about funding right now. So there certainly is a lot more acceptance of this and a willingness to recognize, a willingness to pay for it, and recognition that if you don't manage these areas, then bad things happen.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a greater realization that almost anything you do environmentally has to be longer term.
Right.
That, I mean, audit the current efforts to plant trees, for instance.
Right.
If you're simply planting trees and walking away, they're not going to really make any difference. And so it needs to be part of a larger planning effort, hopefully part of some restoration in terms of, thinking about what it means to have a field of trees, or
Right.
with that ecologically they need to make sense. But you do need to care for that, and that takes money and commitment
Mhm.
to make sure that places are cared for.
Yeah, and that's the other reason that I started to vet this concept of having the Stewardship Network Fund to fund our member communities, because one of the other kind of trends in funding is that 3 years is a long time to get a grant for, and then you get a grant and you do this restoration, or monitoring is not included. You can't do monitoring, and how important that monitoring is. And so I'm looking forward to flipping the script on that as well.
Yeah, that is one of the challenges. I know that some of the federal programs will want to know how many acres you've restored in this particular year. And the truth is that you haven't really restored it yet,
Right.
that it's a process. And so continuing to push for a greater understanding that there is this long-term process of caring for land and restoring some integrity to lands that have been deeply disturbed.
Mhm.
And I see in terms of trends, maybe a broadening of areas of interest. I think when we started, it was easy to see all the invasive species that were everywhere and to focus on those. But I think over time, the network has created an umbrella where people that are more interested in pollinator issues or other taxa, herps, reptiles, amphibians, or other insects, all sorts of things, gives them a place to look, maybe find other volunteers and other like-minded folks and to pursue their interests.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, that's again back to the spring challenge. And if you have just tuned in, you're tuning into the Stewardship Network's monthly webcast. I'm here, Lisa Brush, with Dave Borneman and Bob Grese, who have both retired after decades-long careers in stewardship and restoration. And I think one of the other elements of that broadening is that you get people who are maybe interested in frogs and toads, or they're interested in butterflies, and you have that. You've created a broader palette for them to pursue their stewardship from. Yeah.
Which is ultimately, you and I were at a presentation on whole communities years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the messages for me on that was that we need to, if we're going to have a successful movement, we need to really broaden it. So it's not folks who just are interested in the same things that we are, but for some folks, it might be pollinators, it might be clean water, it might be environmental justice, clean air. Stewardship looks different to different people. And so I think the broader we can build our umbrella and our net, the more strength we can have and a broader support base. Yeah,
that's as Mark said, perfect time for Mark's comment, inclusion, diversity, the most powerful tool of all, right? And that to have true collaboration, cursor not working so well. To have true collaboration, respect, and listening are essential. And so just that's been the thread throughout the whole thing, whether that's listening in terms of what do people want planted and how do they want the project to go down, as well as.
And I think that's been one of the powerful things about the Stewardship Network is really having strength at local levels, that it can be a national or perhaps even international effort, but supporting that effort on the ground, where people have boots on the ground and their local knowledge is really critical.
Yeah, and I think the other element that we know, as we talked about, it's long-term, we're in this for the long game, it's long-term stewardship. So that's again, what the fund will understand, and that the capacity that's needed and the support that's needed to do that work. And so that the tools that we provide in terms of some of the, the backbone, whether it's just, whether it's Zoom now, whether it's some of that, or just even the donation platforms or the registration pieces or some of those kinds of things, so that people who are doing stewardship can do stewardship and stay outside and keep that going, I think is really also a powerful part of what we can do. And then, as I said earlier, just the lessons learned across different ones, so that, as you said, you used to have to go to Chicago to find that.
Right.
And then now you can build it here, and now have an opportunity to learn from different local, what we are now calling our member communities.
Yeah. Well, technology, we can work locally here, but also tune in to these webcasts and find out what people are doing around the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the encouraging things to me has been the responsiveness that, so for instance, here locally, as an invasive plant, stiltgrass, came into our area, that working with the Stewardship Network and other groups, local teams were able to mobilize pretty quickly, borrowing people from different organizations, and learn from what other folks in other parts of the country, what their experiences have been. And that is so critical as we think about challenges that may be moving around in terms of climate change and changing conditions around the world.
Mm-hmm. So that makes me think about what do you think about, we've talked a little bit about the awareness of people involved in stewardship, which is a small subset of people, and we want to make it available and the opportunity for more and more people. What do you think the awareness of climate change has kind of done for stewardship? And as you say, I think about what are the ways in which we think about this, right? And how do we manage this? And how do we learn from tribes who've been managing ecosystems for generations and generations, and some of that kind of work?
I know for myself, people early on would talk about should we be planting different things or changing our approach based due to climate change? And I kind of poo-pooed it and said, nah, I don't think so. But I have to answer that differently now. And I'm not sure what the right answer is, but it certainly has become, there's an awareness that this is really here and it's a more serious issue perhaps, and it's not just going to go away on its own. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. So I think there's more discussion about it now. I don't know what the right answers are, but it's a more realistic issue to deal with.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because of age or what, but I think I find myself approaching things with a lot more humility. That there may be more resilience in local ecosystems, that we need to really help local systems help preserve biodiversity and really keep processes in place. Oftentimes in the past, we've often thought we had the answers where we really don't. So we need to move cautiously forward, try new things, but also, be very, very humble in the way we look at managing land.
I think that's right. And that again goes to, so many of the themes that are weaving through this is the whole idea that, we can't sit on high and know what the right answer is.
Right.
And that the thing that I've often talked about is fall in love with the land, get to know it, listen to it. It's sending messages to us, as you said, the spring wildflowers and Mary Beth Doyle, that
Right.
kind of thing. And so if we can listen, it's there for us to see how we're responding and adjust to that. And I also think in that regard, there's thinking in the long game. And so I remember I was down doing a volunteer work day with the Michigan State Park Stewardship Program, planting Lake Plain Prairie. And I was definitely thinking, I was like, this is not for my generation. This is not, I'm doing this for the generations to come.
Right.
Yeah. And how do we keep that in mind? And I also think, so one of the other things that Dave, you can speak to is some of the rise in stewardship among youth, right? So that didn't happen in the beginning when these volunteer work days with high school, middle school students
Right.
are happening. And so I think that's also been something that's changed in the schools.
Could be. You look through the questions, because
Okay.
you can't do that. We're not used to doing this on live camera. So
Okay, great. Exactly.
check
right.
the numbers. I think what you're referring to, the Natural Area Preservation Program in the city has work days throughout the year. And it used to be, we would maybe just have work days for smaller groups. And then we started getting asked to do them for some of the larger schools and things. I think one of the changes was simply us gearing up so that buying more loppers and hand saws and gloves and things. So now we can accommodate those bigger groups. And the more we could accommodate, the more interest there was. And one of the few groups around that could handle a school
300.
of 300 or 400 people.
Right.
But again, the network has stepped in, because we may not have the staffing and the tools to do that. We have one event, we can't really gear up with enough staff to do that one event, but we could reach out to partners through the network and they could all come in and help run that work day. So I think it's a combination of increasing capacity within our own organization and reaching out to partners, but also the schools recognizing that after you do some of the smaller ones, maybe one class does it and says, wow, that was really a great experience for the kids. We should have all the classes do this next time.
Yeah, no, and those relationships I think are so key. I think at the heart of any of the stewardship networks kind of member community work is the trust and connectivity that happens.
Right.
And so we were talking about stiltgrass, and Andrea, thank you for your early keen eye.
Right.
Andrea in the comments says, thanks for mentioning stiltgrass and the wonderful, almost instant collaboration that occurred. She says stiltgrass seedlings will start to be emerging soon, so awareness. But it is, that's the kind of thing that, because we had that trust and connectivity, that was really able to, as she said, almost instantaneous, because we'd already built, we weren't coming from the wary, what do you want us to do?
Right.
I'm sorry, you want us to do these work days together? It's like, sure, here are our shovels,
Right.
or here's our staff, and we're going to do this together.
Right. Yeah, and the trust you talked about earlier in terms of competing for volunteers, Lisa, I'll give you credit. I think that's key, is to not compete for them, and you've always done a great job, I think, of just somehow working through any of the competition that exists between different organizations, and recognizing that there's not a scarcity mentality, there's lots to go around, and we're gonna do better if we all collaborate. And so I think that's been key to help to not compete for those things and be able to freely share volunteers and tools. And
Yeah.
staffing.
It is, and one of the things that I've also always said is that it does take us all. It really does. It takes us all, as we were talking earlier about the university operates at a slower pace because there are more layers that you have to go through. And then if you know the players, then you can know who can act fast and who needs more time to come on. And so that, if you will, partner, collaborator, cultural awareness, I think is also real key, that you can't just ask. You might be able to ask a nonprofit or NGO if they can make a decision in a month, but if you want something to happen at the state or federal level, you need a year. You might need even longer
Right.
than that. And so some of that kind of thing, I also think has been really a key to both the Stiltgrass work as well as the kind of collaborations that we have with these larger work days that bring people in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I also want to share is the whole idea that also in the beginning of the collaborations, you start out with the safer stuff. So like, do you remember when one of the first things we did was a shared calendar? Like we just wanted to know what everybody else was doing, right? Do you remember that? I mean,
Yeah.
that was a really big deal.
Huh.
And that was low hanging fruit, to start to be able to say, oh, your work days are on the third Saturday of the month. I'll do them. I'll think about not doing them on those same days. And so you start out with the lower hanging fruit. And then, as that trust and connectivity builds, then you can start to do things like 300-person work days
Right.
with
That's a good
schools.
point.
Yeah, exactly. And we find that still, and that's one of the neat things for us to be able to say, being around for 20 years now, or longer than that, as we started in 1998 with the first piece that you were talking about, Bob. So that's getting on 25 years since we first sat down and had those steward circles, and continuing to, I think, just having that model that shows that, as Sheila and Jacqueline and others plan the stewards hikes that are very much built on the 20 years of doing those kinds of things. So what are you doing now?
Well, I retired officially in February, but I did that because it was just before the spring burn season. So I've retired from my city work, but I still am doing restoration work, doing a lot of prescribed burning. So I've been busy with that all spring, and that's just now finally winding down. So starting to feel like maybe I'm officially retired now.
Right. I think we were talking earlier and you said, somebody asked you, how's retirement? And you said, if it's burning all the time and not getting a lot of sleep, it's great if you like that.
That's true.
Yeah. And Bob, what about you? What are you up to?
Well, I retired in the summer of 2020, and it allowed me to get my hands in the dirt. So I volunteer helping care for some parts of the Botanic Gardens and Arboretum that I stewarded for many years, but I also have been lending my design services to various community groups and working with organizations like the Wild Ones. So I seem to keep pretty busy.
And Bob, say a little bit more. One of the things when you took over as director, it was before Matthaei and the Arb kind of merged in terms of organization and operation, but you really changed up a little bit of the way those properties were managed. Right.
Well, we collectively, the Botanic Gardens and Arboretum have about 400 acres of land total. And, it's really important to know what you have, first of all. So began looking at historical records, but then also looking at survey works. And one of the most enlightening thing we did was when we hired one of Dave's former employees, Bev Walters, to come in and do a botanical survey of our properties that gave us much more knowledge of what was there and how we might be protecting it long term.
And then the work that you've done around the Great Lakes ecosystems and the pieces of.
Right. Well, I had been we had an opportunity to create some new gardens at the Botanic Gardens, and I had read a number of historical documents that thought that Botanic Gardens in a local region ought to be showcasing some of the unique habitats in a region, and there are several models around the country that do that. So that was really the idea behind our Great Lakes Gardens, was to be a place that would acquaint people with the beauty of our local ecosystems, but also to talk about some of the management challenges of those sites.
That's great. So as we start to come to the top of the hour here, any kind of final closing thoughts that you two want to make? I want to say, I mean, it's so fun for me to, first of all, see you both after not having seen you during the whole pandemic, but then also just to think back to the early days. Like we had no idea. We had no idea where this was going to go.
I would say, for me, you talked about what we started the network and what we dreamed it might be. And what it's become is so much more than what I could have ever dreamed that it would be. And Lisa, under your leadership, that's all happened. And it's become not just bigger geographically, but financially. And it's wonderful, very satisfying to see this idea that slowly started emerging 25 or so years ago for us in terms of getting some of the local folks together to see what it's become. I think far surpasses my wildest dream. So congratulations to you and the network for that great success.
Pretty fun, and to all of you all, right? That's
Yeah.
that's what makes it all happen.
Yeah, I would agree that you deserve a lot of credit, Lisa, that your facilitation skills over the years, I think, have really helped the organization grow. I guess if there's one thing that I learned in my years of administration is to really be open to ideas from the people around you and allow people to the space to experiment and try new things. And you're not always going to be successful, but my sense is that you're going to be successful more of the time than if you tried to do it your own way all the time.
Yeah, it's great. I was just talking to somebody who was talking about what do they think, how do they think they are different because of their engagement with the network? And one of the things that this person said is, I think I ask for more. Like, you know that maybe I can actually ask you for shovels. Like I wouldn't think that I could ask you for shovels, or I can ask you for more than that. And so because you have that trust and connectivity and that authenticity is there, that you know that if the answer is no, the answer is no. Yeah.
And so to see the network grow and personally to think of all the connections I've made through the network over the years, it's allowed me the annual conference, whether it be in person or online, is just a great way to reconnect with people. And early on, I went to when I was new with the city, I was just a staff of one, and I got involved with some of the Nature Conservancy folks. I remember going to a conference that they had, a national conference for their stewardship team down in Tucson, and there was a whole room full of hundreds of people, and the person speaking said, well, we're all working towards the same thing, towards stewardship, and everybody agreed. And I thought, boy, that must be great to be part of an organization where you're not just a lone voice and everybody there is interested in stewardship. And although the city hasn't grown that big, to be able to look out across the network and see this huge, vast number of people that are all working together in the same thing is really satisfying. It makes me feel like, what efforts I was doing here in Ann Arbor are part of a much bigger world.
Yeah, it's really true. And when we talked about in the beginning, for the volunteers, they can just pay attention to their natural area,
right?
But now also in that same way that as you pass on the drip torch, that
Right.
you can know that it's being carried on, and it is really taking off.
Not passing on the drip torch, just
the torch.
Just the office keys.
just the office keys, exactly. Good. All right. So thank you all for being with us. Before you go, I want to make sure, really appreciate spending the last hour together with you. Hope you have a good rest of your day, but I want to just remind you that we are in the midst of the Spring Challenge. And so before you go, remember it's now through July 5th. It's the most inclusive yet. I just talked to somebody on a Lake Erie island who emailed me and said, I just did my report last night. It was so easy. I thought it was, I had been kind of putting it off for a little bit. So any of the work that you've been done, again, remember it's the most inclusive one yet. I can go to presenter mode. That might be helpful. There we go. So remember, now through July 5th, everybody, the most inclusive one yet. Hashtag TSN Spring if you're the social media sort. And again, the reporting form, take a look at it. It's not very complex. You just need to have some of your data in front of how many hours did you do? How many people was it? Was it just you planting your tomato plant in your garden? Or were you out there with a whole bunch of people doing work? And next month we'll be with Ricky Ackerman from the Eastside Community Network. And he is going to be talking, as we talked about, stewardship looks different in different places. So he's going to be talking about, we've been here, resident leadership and stewardship on Detroit's East Side. So we'll take a look at stewardship in the city of Detroit on the East Side. So look forward to joining you then. Thank you all for being with us. And we will see you next month on the second Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being a part of the network. Thank you, Lisa.
You are welcome.